Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to Sala 2022, brought to you by Art Forum and the Montalvo Arts Center. The presenters at this session of Red Earth and Pouring Rain are a power pair. The well-known author Vikram Chandra and the equally well-known journalist, author Salil Tripathi. Vikram Chandra is an author and entrepreneur. He shot into fame with his novel Sacred Games, which was translated into India's first Netflix TV series in Hindi. His first novel, Red Earth and Pouring Rain, bagged the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. His latest book is Geek Sublime, The Beauty of Code, The Code of Beauty. And it was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Vikram Chandra is co-founder and CEO of Granthika Company, a software startup which is using groundbreaking technology to reinvent writing and reading for the digital age. Salil Tripathi is a contributing editor at the Caravan magazine and has been a columnist for 14 years at Mint. He chaired PEN, International Writers in Prison Committee, from 2015 to 2021, and is now a member of its board. In 2015, he received the Red Ink Award from the Mumbai Press Club for Human Rights Journalism. In November 2011, he won the third prize at the Bastiat Awards for journalism about free societies. Offense, the Hindu Case, was his first book. His book on the Bangladesh War of Liberation, titled The Colonel Who Would Not Repent, The Bangladesh War and Its Unquiet Legacy, was longlisted for the Best Work of Non-Fiction Award at the Tata Literature Festival in 2015. His collection of travel writing, titled Detours, Songs of the Open Road, was published in 2015. While the words Red Earth and Pouring Rain bring back wonderful personal memories of summers spent in my village in the Konkan region of Maharashtra, where it never rains, only pours, washing everything inside the color of the red laterite that makes up the Konkan soil, I am sure Vikram Chandra and Salil Tripathi will awash us with rain of a different kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
So at a time when people seem to read less and less, either through TikTok or Instagram or blog posts and all that, the man on my left writes big books. And he writes big books that are sprawling in their stories. There are stories within the stories. And to quote Eliot, and we should quote Eliot this week because week is the 100th anniversary of The Wasteland, he squeezes the universe into a ball and rolls it towards an overwhelming question: who we are, how we are, what we do, and what are the stories we tell about ourselves and how we share our lives. So the fiction that he has written is there are always stories within the stories. Even the short story collection that he wrote, the Love and Longing in Bombay, 5 separate stories, but again told by one narrator, and somehow they get interwoven, as that city tends to be. Red Earth and Pouring Rain, as we know, was awarded and was very well received. I read it when it came out in the mid-1990s. And Love and Longing in Bombay, of course, was a novel, was a collection in which we meet this quaint inspector called Sartaj Singh, who then takes a life of his own in the Sacred Games. But let's start at the very beginning. Among the great titles of the novels that you can think of is, of course, Red Earth and Pouring Rain. And it's, of course, and Vikram acknowledges it right in the beginning, it comes from Kuruntukai 40 from A.K. Ramanujan. What could my mother be to yours? What kin is my father to yours anyway? And how did you and I meet ever? But in love, our hearts are mingled like red earth and pouring rain, as Sandhya was alluding to so poetically a little while ago. The novel captures the twilight period of India's history. This is when the Mughals have ended their empire, Peshwas are flexing their muscles, all kinds of foreign powers are trying to seek a toehold or some kind of a foothold into India. And at the same time, you have mercenaries from those countries defending some of the Rajas and Sultans at that time. So there is that story going on. And then there's this other picaresque part of it, of this young man called Abhay, who's a learning and student America. And I think there's this famous scene about in Texas, I think, in a cricket match where they're bowling and imagining themselves with Prasanna and Chandrasekhar, if I recall correctly. Yeah. But the point is that there are porn stars, there's Jack the Ripper in it, and there's everything that you can imagine would make a story. And a monkey who types, who steals people's genes and food and all that. So it's like the monkey becomes the Shehrazade and tells us a story about who we are and how we are. So there's so much that you packed into it, and it becomes what you were yourself got one of the characters saying, an undecoded mystery. But as these stories mount, there was one message that was very apparent. And you have to remember this was written in 1995, published 3 years after the Babri Masjid demolition. It's about the polyphonous multi-everything India, where it's not the idea of imposing one story or one narrative. That's the idea that dehumanizes us. And since the theme is about humanity for this festival, it's worth remembering that the India that he writes about and talks about is a very different kind of India from what it is becoming today. Now, when you published it in 1990s, and now that you look at it 30-something years later, it sounds very prescient, Vikram. What was on your mind when you wrote it? How long did it take you to write it? Did you write it in multiple drafts? What were the inspirations?
So I started writing it I was going to Columbia Film School. I think that was 86. And I realized very soon that I'm not built for film. It's too collaborative. There's too much money involved. And so in the Columbia Library, I found the autobiography of a man named Colonel James Sikandar Skinner, who becomes one of the protagonists of Red Earth and Pouring Rain. And he was half British and English and half Rajput. Right, so he's one of those people caught in that clash of cultures in the early 19th century in India. And this is a real person, obviously, right? And he becomes a famous soldier. The regiment that he fights first for one of the Peshwas and then switches over to the British. And he founds a regiment called Skinner's Horse, right, which is the senior regiment of Indian cavalry in the Indian Army, right? So, I mean, I went off and then to the MA program at the Johns Hopkins Creative Writing Program, and the first day I get there, this is now 87, I started writing it, right? And it was published in 95, so it took me 8 years, about more or less, a little more before that, thinking about it. And that's my usual pace for books, it seems. So as to what you were talking about, you used a very nice word, like prescient, right? But I don't think it really is, right? Because what is happening in today's India, you could feel coming way, way back, right? And not just to the 80s, but I would say pre-independent, right? And it's always disturbed me, right? So you're talking about A.K. Ramanujan. So one example of what you're talking about is that A.K. Ramanujan wrote this lovely, lovely essay called 300 Ramayanas. 5 examples and 3 notes on translation, right? And what he's talking about there is that one scholar has counted up 300 versions of the Ramayana in the Indian subcontinent, but also in Indonesia, in the Southeast Asia, right? So and it demonstrates the variety of narratives in those 5 examples, and there are many of those versions of the Ramayana in which the character's virtues are flipped. Sita is very different from what she is in the mainstream Ramayana. And so this was in the syllabus at Delhi University for a graduate program. In 2008, a bunch of ABVP activists turn up at the department and say, you cannot teach this anymore because it offends Hindu sensibilities, right? And they're speaking apparently for all Hindus. Who are they all speaking for, right? And they actually assault the head of the department, right, and break up stuff. And at that point, the department stood up and didn't back down and kept it. And then 2011, same thing happened. Pressure was kept on, and then that was removed from the syllabus, right? So, I mean, it's bizarre, right? Because on the one hand, you're saying is that our culture is one of multifariousness, right? We're a pagan culture, you have many gods and so forth. On the other hand, you're like making it about one narrative, right? And doing it in a way which involves intimidation and violence, right? And so, that I felt that coming, and that came out in the book, and I guess in some sense I've been writing about that ever since.
Sobering and prophetic at the same time.
Yeah.
You were born and grew up in Delhi. But Bombay has been, in a sense, your muse, right? The 5 stories of love and longing, dharma, faith, shakti, strength, kama, love, earth, wealth, and shanti, peace. Again, we meet many characters there. And again, you write about a particular kind of Bombay where you have a relationship with a city which is quite different from... So another writer who has written magnificently about Bombay, Salman Rushdie, and we all want him to get well very soon, right? Not just in this room, but around the world. So, but the Bombay Salman writes about typically is South, Malabar Hill, Kolaba, and all that. But you take the stories beyond. What aspects of Bombay resonate with you? What makes you situate stories in specific? I know Love and Longing does have one particular story in Malabar Hills.
Yeah. Well, so, I've lived at various points in Bombay, at various geographical locations, right? Each of which have their own flavor, they have their own sort of population, right? So South Bombay, as many of you know, is like the old elite, right? The moneyed people from way back, right? And then we lived there, and then we moved out to Andheri, to Lokhandwala, right? Which at the point we moved out there was just like the beginnings of a one main bazaar street, and like half constructed buildings and huge piles of bricks and those enormous coils of wire, right? And that thrust us into a completely new place, right? The People's Republic of Andheri. And it's a very different environment. Yari Road, which is nearby at Lokhandwala, at that point started becoming for the strugglers of the film industry, right, who had just come, if you could afford it, you rented or lived there. And it was amazing, right? Because you could walk into a coffee shop and see these beautifully toned, beautiful people like strutting about, right? And the secretaries, who are the agents in Bombay, like working their phones, and trying to get jobs. So there's that, right? And then like there's a kind of like a horizontal dimension. And then obviously in all parts of Bombay, there's a horizontal one, right? So the rich live in these, now it used to be Bandra Bungalow, right? Which is the rich of the film industry in the 50s started buying and building bungalows there, right? But what always happens in Bombay is that next to this like rich man's home, there will be a basti, right, which is a very different kind of habitation, and the interaction happens between them in terms of people from the bastis working for the middle class and the wealthy, right? So I mean that's right there in front of you, right? If you look at it for longer than 5 minutes, it's there, right? And then the crime stuff, right, started like really hotting up in mid 80s, right? So before that, it was like kind of a cottage industry, like a bunch of local guys in some area who kind of boss people around. And those times they had wonderful names like the Cobra Gang and stuff like that. Right? And then, this kind of, I don't know what to call him, entrepreneur who's kind of brilliant in his own way, Dawood Ibrahim, comes along. He's a police constable's son, and he basically turns it into a corporate enterprise. Right, so that's why the gangs were D Company, right? D Company and so forth, right? And it has a hierarchical corporate structure. There's the people at the top, Dubai often, or Thailand, right, running it off the phone, and then under that there are the controllers, and under that there are the soldiers, right? So what happened was that as you turned into that, and the economic pie grew from like knife fights and shoving fights. Somewhere, these guys started having automatic weapons firing, in the city. And so we lived in Lokhandwala, and one day my father used to work in South Bombay, so we were driving back, and we're heading up the main street towards our house, and suddenly there's automatic weapons fire echoing off the buildings, right? And it's like, what the hell's going on? And you couldn't tell because of the echoes where it was coming from. So we get home, and it turns out that is the famous shootout at Lokhandwala, right, which was made into a movie, right? So So, and then, my family's all in the film industry. So, my brother-in-law, who's a very successful producer-director, Vidhu Vinod Chopra, so I should say the context of this is that the film industry has always been a very soft target for revenue for these guys, right? So they one thing they do is before the banks started giving loans for making movies, before the studio showed up, if you want to make a movie, you went to a guy called a financier, right, and asked him, and you didn't ask questions about where the cash came from, and much of it was delivered in suitcases, right, to your home or to your office, and you made a movie, right, and that money was also invested by the guy sitting in Dubai or your local guy, right, but the other half of it was that a month before your movie was going to release, you would get a phone call from so-and-so bhai, right, I'm so-and-so bhai's man, and you have to give us this much cash, right, send us your suitcases to us, right, so and if you don't do that, we will kill you, right, and they're serious people, right, like I knew people, friends of mine who were getting these calls. One of my friends actually got shot, right, he's outside his office, he's getting into his car, they fire, the bullet missed his heart by an inch, right, and luckily he fell into the car, so they drove him away, the driver had good reflexes. So, and then Vidhu, my brother-in-law, gets these calls, and he's like a genuinely kind of sort of crazy guy, right? So he tells them essentially to fuck off, right, in a very colorful Punjabi way, right? What that means is that the next day, and for the next 2 years, there were armed police guards on him, right? And it was very strange for me, because I would go visit, and I would walk past these guys, and what was really odd is that after a little while, it became completely ordinary, right? Like, say, hi, how are you guys doing? And go up and come down. So I started to wonder, like, why is this happening, right? Like, what are the economics of this? Where do these people come from? Who are they? And so I luckily, when I was writing that cop story in Love and Longing in Bombay, I wanted again to kind of get the geography of what I was writing about straight. So I'd met Hussain Zaidi, right? And some of you will know who he is. He's a very successful writer, crime journalist, and he became a very good friend and my guide into this world, right? And so when it came time to write Sacred Games, I just said, Hussain, bhai, you got to introduce me again. We got to go through this again. And so then I started, all I knew about it at that point was what I knew about it in the movies, right? So it was really marvelously interesting in some ways. I always started those conversations with, look, I'm a writer, and I will never reveal your names, right? And so you can talk to me, and, all of that kind of stuff. Sometimes that didn't make sense to some of them. What do you mean you're writing a book? Then I would say, I'm also working on a screenplay, which then was completely fine, because by that time Ram Gopal Verma had made, his movies and so on. So then that was fine. And they watched those movies with a very critical and interested eye. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
So at what point did you think, just to understand the chronology, Love and Longing, and then Sacred Games. So when you were writing the Sartaj Singh story, did you think there was a novel in this?
No.
At what point did you know that this can become, and such a big novel, say 700, 800, 900
Right.
pages, yeah.
So, that book was a reaction to writing a big 500-page Red Earth and Pouring Rain, right?
Okay,
Like I was
right.
like, okay, I don't want to spend 8 years again.
Hmm.
And I'd only written short stories, in school and college. So maybe I should try and flex my other muscles a bit and do short stories. So what am I going to do? So then the idea became, I'll write a bunch of short stories in the forms that I love, right? So there's one, what are the stories? There's one story, a ghost story, right? Because I love ghost stories. There's another story about social warfare between, the ladies who lunch around Malabar Hill, that kind of thing. And then I wanted to write a cop story, right? An investigation, cop procedural, which I really love. So that's what I met Hussain for. And then usually when I finish writing a book, I'm just done with it, right? Whatever. And this man Sartaj just stayed with me. I don't know why, right? And so when I started to think about, okay, how are you going to approach a journey of this sort? Like Sartaj was just there. right? And it's like, why are you still hanging around?
Yeah.
But it became very convenient, right? It was like, it was right there.
Yeah. Now, you do show in Secret Games, the Bombay, that those from Bombay, or those who feel very strongly about South Bombay, the sobo snobs like me, right? I mean, we feel, no, this is not really Bombay. No, not everybody is a criminal. Not everybody is like on the make and all that. But you really show the city with Watts and all, where everybody is connected. The businessman, the politician, the film star, and the criminal gang.
Yeah.
What led you to do that? Was it kind of a response to the South Bombay that you knew and its snobbery?
See, again, I didn't plan any of this. I never planned anything. I mean, I really envy writers who have a structure in their head, and then the beginning, middle, end, these are the main events, I'm just going to write this. So what happened was, okay, so I'm going to write this book, and for some reason this gangster has barricaded himself inside this weird bunker-like house, and is talking to Sartaj over an intercom. But I had no idea why the gangster was there, right? And at that point, I still believed that I was writing like a 250-page cop thriller kind of thing, right? Like I don't know what a comparable example would be. So I started thinking about this, and I started writing, and I'm simultaneously, through Hussein and other people, talking to everyone I can. And so, and pretty soon it became very clear to me that obviously organized crime cannot exist in a really structured and powerful way without political connections, right? And so it's a mutual exchange of value, right? Lots of money passes back and forth between cops, the gangs, the politicians. I mean, if you've been keeping up with various scandals in Bombay recently, you will know this, right? Yeah. And so I'm doing this, and then, you're talking about the gangs, and then I was sitting with a senior cop in his office in Bombay, and he said, you'll never understand what's really going on unless you go to Delhi and talk to X and Y. And X and Y were people in the intelligence services, right? Because what happens is that America does this everywhere, every country does this, that if you're in some kind of conflict, the present already existing organizations become allies, right? Potential allies. So if you're going to move money and or people across a border, who better to do that than you take the help of the local guy who's smuggling anyway, right? They know the routes, they know what it is, right? And so we've all known this, right? Like this idea of the after the Babri Masjid, when the attacks happened in Bombay, right? Who were the conduits? Where did the plastic explosives come through? Who left that scooter, down in the market in the, what is it called? Anyway, I'm going to forget. So you get the point, right? Like, so there are all these connections, and so then I ended up in Delhi, luckily able to talk to some of these people, right? So then the other side is that
Manish Market.
Manish Market.
That's right. Sorry.
Right?
You left me there, I had to remember it,
The famous scooter,
it's
Rakesh Maria, one of Rakesh Maria's people, puts the key in there, right?
Yeah.
That leads to Tiger Memon.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. And then obviously through all this, there is no way you can write about politics in current India without writing about religion.
Correct.
Right? And so then there is another whole thread, and I was like, what the hell am I doing? Right? And so that's why the book became so big, because it had to somehow contain all of this.
Yeah.
Right?
I reviewed it in Far Eastern Economic Review when it came out all those years ago, and gripping, real page turner. So which brings me to the next question, that most people, when they look at a book and look at a movie, the snobs like to say that the book was better, kind of a thing. You wrote the book, and you've been involved with the film. And if you were to be dispassionate, are they the same thing? Are they different? Do you prefer one over the other?
No, I mean, I think of them as like two universes that are connected at an angle, right? So, so one of the things that I knew before this whole series thing started was that because I worked in the film industry, that you have to make radical leaps to translate to take a book, a fiction or whatever, non-fiction, and you have to change it, right? So that's why you see at the beginning of like many movies, inspired by a true story. Because what they mean is they found a true story and now we're going to
Made it up.
Yeah, we're going to do this other thing. And it's obvious, right? Because, like, think about it, right? In the first 100 pages of the novel, I think Sartaj doesn't really do anything. He just, like, goes around the city. There's a little case, local murder case that's happening. He investigates that, right? You can't do that in a series that you're trying to sell as an international, potentially international thriller, right? Because you have to start with the hook, big bang, and then you have to end each episode with a hook, right? And like I said, I'm not built for the film industry because I don't have a sense of that timing. I understand structure, and I can help once somebody gives me that structure to, like, give notes on that, right? So, but it was kind of like when they sent me an early draft of that first episode, it was kind of shocking, right? My wife read it and said, "This is not your book." And I said, when we deposited that first check, it ceased to be our book. Right? I mean, one of the things was that, Parulkar in the book is like Sartaj's close mentor, right? And he's a cynical player of the worst kind.
Yeah.
But he's like, Sartaj has grown up with him. And then suddenly he's in the thing supervising Sartaj getting beaten up in a bathroom. So I think that's what Melanie was all upset about.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
who is this guy?
Yeah.
Right? So that's what happens, right? But I was very, very pleased. And it was really great that it was made into a series, right? Because when the book first came out, through my agent, one of the heads of a very well-known studio in LA got in touch and said, come have lunch with me, right, in LA. So I go and we have lunch, and he said, we want to option the book and try to make, we're going to make a feature film out of it. I was like, you guys are nuts. How are you going to put all of this in, even if you make a 3-hour, 2.5-hour movie, which you can't do it probably for the States. But they made lovely films, and I said, okay, I'll take your money again, right? And it'd be interesting. And so they hired a really well-known British screenwriter and playwright to do the adaptation, and he struggled with it for a couple of years. And I didn't read any of those drafts, but finally it didn't happen, right? They dropped the option. And this was way back in 2005, right? So HBO has just started this whole series thing. So like good 8 years later or something like that, we get interest again, this time from a producer in New York through my agent again. And then I was like, okay, a series would be lovely, right? Because you can spread out, you have that width.
Yeah.
And then, we went through the whole development hell thing. I don't know if you guys know what that means. It's like somebody options your book, and then you and somebody else do a pilot draft, and then they give you notes, and then it comes back to you, you do another draft, and then again you get notes, and finally they drop it after 2 years. So we did the rounds of all the studios in LA, and Netflix finally bit, and I think it was brilliant, right? Because what they did with it was also the other very difficult thing in terms of screenplay structuring with this thing, is that you have 2 parallel narrative tracks being told simultaneously. Like, how the hell are you guys going to do that? And I think the writers in Bombay and Vikram and Anurag, the directors, and Neeraj, of course. I'm really bad at names. Beginning of every semester, I tell my students, I'm going to try and tell you about a book I love, and I'm going to forget its name. And can somebody look it up on, nowadays you can look it up on your phones, so it happens much faster, right? And I think these guys did a brilliant job in how they moved out, right? Even in terms of each sequence and the shot that translates over, right? That brings you over. It was amazing, right? So I was very, very happy.
Yeah.
And it was, all of us thought, we were excited, Netflix, for a series, technically they've given us money to make a really glossy, world-class product. And we hoped it was going to go big, but we never thought that it would be seen by people outside the country, right? And it's interesting, still, I'll be in an Uber and we'll get into a conversation. What do you do? I teach at Berkeley. have you written it? And I'll say the Sacred Games Network. Oh, I saw that. I'm like, you saw that damn thing? It's amazing, right? And it really, as a writer, as creators, it's astonishing and really brilliant, right?
Yeah.
That something that you made goes across the world, across not just space but also time, right? And finds readers and watchers.
Yeah. Last night you spoke about your intimate relationships with the film industry, and you alluded to Vidhu Vinod Chopra. And of course, your sister is a well-known critic, Anupama, and Tanuja is a very well-known screenwriter. So you have, while you don't see yourself as a film person, you understand films. And Hindi films for the longest period of time have, captured the ethos of India, unity in diversity and all that. Even if you think about Pakistan, it's in the early days a film like Waqt, where, Balraj Sahni hankers for what he has left behind.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you talk about Hindu-Muslim relationships, you think about Amar, Akbar and Anthony, 3 streams of blood going into the mother and that kind of, that's the kind of, no, it's mawkish and sentimental, I agree, but at the same time, it makes a point.
Right? But brilliant.
But brilliant
Only
at the same time.
Manmohan Desai could have come
Only
up with
Manmohan
that.
Desai could have done it. But today we have reached a stage where Pakistan appears only in one light in Indian cinema, or Hindi cinema certainly. We are also, in a way, we had moved on. Dilip Kumar, Jayant, Madhubala, Meena Kumari had to change their names when they acted.
Right.
But soon although India had taken the secular democracy path, and suddenly we were in this world where Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan were able to say that they are Khan. My name is Khan. That's the situation in which India was. But if we look back at what Samant Subramaniam has just written in the New Yorker, which I urge everyone to look at his piece last week or the week before, Bollywood has become a target of a very vicious and vociferous group of campaigning. You boycott so-and-so's film because it's from that faith. You boycott this film. You can't let certain types of film get made, and so on. What has become of Hindi cinema? Is it what has become of India? And is it possible for that cinema to recapture that earlier idealism?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. So, so one thing is that given the current temperature of the country, right, and what is happening, I was talking about intimidation earlier, right? Part of it is naked commercial calculation, right? The idea is that if you make these movies in which, our people are shown as virtuous and incredibly brave, and the other side are, savages, basically, right? Uncultured. People will eat that up, right? Even though, what is happening interestingly now is that those movies aren't actually selling, right? Some of them, at least. The other half is just plain, straightforward intimidation, right? And people in the film industry are terrified, right? So, I am too, right? Because my family members are in there. Even as I'm saying this with that damn camera on, maybe I'm a coward, but I'm afraid, right? So just to give you one example, and correct me on this narrative because I should have looked it up last night, but the saga of Shah Rukh Khan's son, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is there's a bunch of young rich people on this yacht parked at the shore, and it's a rich people's party essentially, and there must have been at least a couple of thousand people on that boat. Right. So suddenly a police team shows up and heads straight for Shah Rukh's son, Aryan, right, and his little group of friends. And you've got drugs, right? Interestingly, one of the accompanying the police party is ex-BJP legislator. What was
Something
he?
like that.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And there's this other kind of suspicious character who's some sort of quote-unquote detective investigator of some sort, which it turns out he's been booked himself for stuff before this. So Aryan and his buddies get arrested, police station, search happens and so forth, head off to jail, right? There you go. And then suddenly, and obviously the national media goes nuts about this, right? And then, they're in jail, bail keeps getting refused. Meanwhile, their WhatsApp conversations are showing up, and on national television, and there's some tragically hilarious moments. Like one of the kids had written to the other one, "It's going to be the bomb," right? And so, oh, wait, are they terrorists? They're talking about explosive, right? Right? And so then suddenly, what is it called? The National Drug Agency.
And National NCDC, something like that it's called, yeah.
Is in Bombay investigating these guys, right? For what is,
Yeah.
like, I don't know what they had, I can't remember, like some weed maybe, and like some kind of little substance, right? Why is this happening? Oh, well, maybe they're part of an international drug network, right? And we're going to investigate up the chain. Now imagine this, right? This is the national, like the FBI showing up in LA, right? For some film offspring, right? With a bag full of something, right? And again, the national media is going nuts about this, right? Finally, he's released on bail after a long time, right? And then after that, recently, the agency itself has pulled up its officers, 8 of them, right? So I won't interpret this for you. You should try and understand what's happening yourself. But this is the kind of thing that's done, right? And so
it's what some judges have said in other contexts, that where the process is the punishment.
Punishment, right? So the economic offenses wing,
Yeah.
right? Raiding people, not just in the film industry, but like media houses and so forth. So it's like national level state power being deployed in relation to people, right? Their individual lives. And as you said, the process is the punishment.
Yeah,
Right.
there was another phrase Arun Shourie once used, swatting the fly with an axe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I should say, obviously people can decide that I'm very biased because of my connections, but I should say that I'm not Shah Rukh's friend, right? And I've met him, I think, twice. And the longest time I was at a friend's house and he came in and I sat in a corner and listened to him talk, right? And with Shah Rukh Khan, I'm going to shut up and listen, right? And so, yeah, anyway, and he's fabulously wealthy and well known, and he manages to put together like a dream defense team, who are working. And imagine somebody else who's not that, right? Within this system, right? Journalists, right? Activists and so forth. If this happens to you, so I mean, I think this is part of the cycle, right? And then there's this other thing, the technique of the FIR, right? The first information report. Like you make a movie or series, and somebody will file a report, I don't know, somewhere else, right? In Bihar or something. You have offended us, in some way. And the police team will show up in Bombay to arrest you, right? So that again, and then you have to run for, what is it called? The bail? Anticipatory bail, right? Like, and you have to go into underground hiding, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the New Yorker article is very good, but we were talking in the van over here, and somebody made the observation that it doesn't actually really, I mean, it's great, but it doesn't grasp the kind of ugliness of what is happening.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Changing tracks a little and going to Geek Sublime, we do live in an interconnected world where coders are increasingly determining our lives, algorithms predict how we live, metaverse may become our reality, deepfakes influence our politics, artificial learning efficiently and ruthlessly arrives at conclusions that lead us to uncharted territories, and machines know more about us than what we know about ourselves, and companies gather data about us with little supervision or regulation, making decisions that affect our lives. Without being a Luddite about it, how can we protect our individuality and privacy?
You can't.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Unless you go off the grid altogether.
Okay.
Right? If you're like one of those people who lives in the forest and kind of grows your own food, you always use cash instead of a credit card. Because, I mean, these phones that we carry around are leaky, right?
Yeah.
They give away everything. I'm sure you've had the experience. You go on Amazon and, I want to look for, I don't know, I want to buy a table, right? Then suddenly Facebook will be showing you table ads, right? Because there's an exchange.
Even after you bought one.
Yes, I know. Yeah. And it's there's a marketplace behind the scenes where like all of this is given. and you have to be really careful if you don't want to do this, right? You have to buy some sort of geek open source phone, then you have to install a browser that has like privacy built into it. And I mean, some of it is actually, you're talking about AI, it's anticipatory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so people who, a couple partners in which one of them is pregnant will suddenly start seeing diaper ads, right? Because somewhere they've shown interest in something to do with infants, right? And those will start popping up, right? And like you're talking about the metaverse, and sci-fi writers have been dealing with these paranoid predictions since the last 20, 30, 40 years, right? If you read William Gibson, way back when, they made a series called Peripheral. You guys should watch that. It's very good, right? Where we live inside this cyberspace, which isn't like, right now we move through wires, right? Through Wi-Fi and so all of that. But our world is going to get filled with let's say ads, right? You walk into a department store, right? There's facial recognition going on. They know who you are, right? And all of a sudden a personalized ad pops up on the wall next to you, right? And so the question also is that, if you're trying to defend yourself or your loved ones, or not defend, like some kind of like porous barrier, but nevertheless a barrier. I mean, we face our kids at 14 and 12. When do you give them a phone, right? And like all their peers start getting phones, right? Then what do you do? When do you allow them to make a TikTok account, right? And given, especially on young women, the pressure that kind of influencer universe exerts on you, how long can you protect them from it, right? I think all you can do is teach them, like, some kind of safety sort of skills, right? Like what you put on the internet will stay there forever, even if you think you've deleted it. Yeah, all of that kind of stuff. And luckily our schools, that they've been going to start teaching them this kind of like media literacy in first or second grade. We desperately need misinformation education also. I mean, because we all fall into bias, right? Like, I mean, if I'm on Twitter, the algorithm will learn what I'm interested in. Even if I just pause over the thing, I don't click on anything, they know that, right? And so then it'll feed me more and more of that. This whole bubbling thing that's happening all over the world, right? Where I live in my lefty bubble and other people live in their righty bubble, right? And it's self-reinforcing, right? And you can, like, we all know we've lost people to that, right? Your best friends, your family members, suddenly they're like in some alien universe. And obviously they think of me as some freak from another universe, right?
Yeah. Another thing that you write about in Geek Sublime is, of course, Panini and the elegance of Sanskrit. Yeah. Can you elaborate on that a little? Yeah.
So, the far back kind of like mainstream Vedic culture has always been obsessed with language, right? Language is mantra, right? Like the universe is built out of language, right? It's all grammar in a sense. So around 500 BCE, this man named Panini, who comes in a long tradition of grammarians and linguistic investigators before that, manages to formally define the Sanskrit language, right? And what I mean by formally, to formalize the Sanskrit language is that he works out how you can go from a phoneme, right, the sound that is the smallest unit of language, how you can make words out of that, and how you can construct sentences out of that. I mean, he's not making this up, he's observing how a language works, and he's able to define an algorithm that predicts or allows you to make words and sentences, right? So it's sort of like the definition of a formal language, like any computer language, like C++, or Java, or whatever you want. And it's an astonishing piece of engineering, right? You can print out of the main text, it's set up as a series of rules, right? So rules as in, if this sound comes into this rule, right, and you add this sound to it, it will produce this sound. And then you add a verb to it and it will mean this. And then you put these together in a sentence, and this is going to be the structure of a sentence, which is what programming languages want to do, right? Because you've got to very tightly define Like you can, if I say, I don't know, I'm going to like freeze here, but in English, for instance, I guess you could say the sun has set, and if you want to be clumsy, you can say set has the sun, and you'll work out what I mean, right? I mean, maybe I'm not a native English speaker. You cannot do that in a formal language, right? And especially in programming languages, because nowadays you will kill people, right? If you, it'll actually the compiler will blow up. It won't let you do that, right? So that's what Panini does, and like I said, it's a tight little, incredibly complex piece of linguistic engineering. So Sanskrit is the only language which has been formally, naturally spoken language, which has been formally defined, right? And especially starting in the 50s, Noam Chomsky and others, they were trying to look, is there a set of rules that does this for English, right? Can we define, a set of rules like Panini did? And for every other language, it has failed because the other other languages aren't quite as structured, right? If you want to think about it that way. So, but I should also say that because of this, you will get that WhatsApp forward that says, scientists love Sanskrit, it would be the best programming language, they are using it at NASA. That is complete BS, right? That's not the case, right? Because any natural language in a written or spoken sense produces ambiguity, right? And the linguists and the aesthetic philosophers in the pre-modern tradition knew this really well. Famous example they gave is what I just said. The sun has set, right? There's a guy, 11th century, he says, okay, here's a sentence, the sun has set. The denotative, literal meaning of that is very clear. But if a commander says this to his king, the sun has set, it might mean in a given context, now it is time to attack, right? If a young woman says to her friend, the sun has set, to her sakhi, right? In a certain context, it will mean now it's time to go meet my lover, right? Because now it's kind of dark, right? So they built an entire theory of poetry, of aesthetic pleasure around this kind of thing. Some of you will know this, most of you will know this, the idea of dhvani, right? So the whole idea of poetry is to produce a kind of directed ambiguity, right? That's why you can read a sher which is like 2 lines, and each time you come to it, it'll suggest something else, right? And that's the whole point of literature, right? So, but in a programming environment, you cannot do that. Like I said, you will kill people if you produce any ambiguity. That's what a bug is, right? Because somebody wrote code that did this, they thought it would do this, but it did something else, right? So that's, that's part of what I talk about in Geek Sublime. And I guess the other sort of thrust of Geek Sublime is that programmers, coders love to say code is poetry, right? If you know WordPress, which is everyone has used to build a thing, if you go to the organization, the company website, on the bottom it says in a little footer, code is poetry, right? And VCs and programmers love this idea because it gives them kind of an aesthetic, arty aura, right? And so my idea is, in the book, is what I'm pushing at is that, no, that's not the case. What you guys do is beautiful and elegant in its best moments, but it is not poetry.
Multiple interpretations aren't possible. Absolutely. Since we are in the Valley, and I do want to raise this question to look at the social impact of the Silicon Valley, the whole idea of the IT being a bro culture, that, not being very nice to it. And this is also something you do write about in Geek Sublime. That's why I want to stay with that. We know the Gamergate scandal here. We know the women marching out of the Google offices. We know what Timnit Gebru wrote about the whole issue when she did about the systematic biases. And you correctly pointed out, I think, in Geek Sublime, how ENIAC, the electronic and numerical integrator and calculator, the first computer, most of the scientists there were women. When the Indian rocket went up, there was a lovely image of 6 or 7 sari-clad women cheering, and they were all scientists. They were not cheerleaders or something. And so I'm just wondering what is it about, is it possible to de-nerdify it or de-masculinize it?
This also I write in the book, it's a very long process, right? So we start with the ENIAC when women are doing the actual programming, right? So the like Turing and other people define the formal structure of what computers, and it's brilliant work. But at the point working on the ENIAC, the male scientist is a kind of, what is the word? Like he's a supervisor guy, right? And the women are thought of as secretaries, right? So somebody writes the program, and at that point, early on, it actually looked like a old-timey telephone switchboard, right? So to construct the computer and make it do something, you have to take wires from here and then plug that wire in there, right? So there's a very good book by Nathan Ensmeger in which he points out that it's in the 60s leading up to the 70s when people start to understand that programming it's quite a hard problem and a hard thing to do, and companies want to hire quote-unquote good programmers. They set up a series of tests, basically, interviews and so forth, which, looking back, favor the way that men have been educated and think. And then the underground programmer living in a cave, right? The eccentric guy who comes to work in a shorts when everyone in a 50s, 60s, 70s office is wearing a suit. That sort of the value of that. Once people start understanding that programming is a valuable skill, it becomes, in the States, more and more masculinized, right? And this has happened in other professions as well, right? If you think about the traditional disparity in pay and respect between doctors and nurses, right? That's there. And it's been observed that when a certain skill becomes valuable and it's understood, then it becomes more masculine, right? So I don't know. I mean, and often this is thought of as a pipeline problem as well, right? Because the way that computer departments, computer science departments, and classes are in various colleges, that tends to push out young women from that. But obviously, as Timnit was pointing out, that especially in Silicon Valley, the culture is a bro culture, right? So I was talking to some women who are involved in the gaming, making computer games in the 90s. And there were things like, how are we going to bond on a Friday night? Well, let's go to a strip club, yay, So that kind of thing, right? So women, again, I mean, it's that kind of casual sexism which is taken to be the natural order of things is a big problem, right? And then people, I mean, and it's interesting, right, that in India, and that at least starting early, women, there's a greater proportion of programmers who are women in India, right? And there's interesting, sort of work around that. And one of the things that is clear is that because it's indoors work, right? Because it's set in an office, that kind of environment is thought of as kind of safe. Right? It's a women-friendly environment, right? So there's an actual interview that a researcher did. I think the interview was done in the 90s. She's asking a guy in a computer company, like some kind of company, which has a kind of warehouse and it has the programmers, right? And a guy on the warehouse floor says that, women should not work here because it is the ladies-friendly thing. He uses the word ladies, right? Ladies should work over there. Right? Because you don't have to go out, you don't have to interact with people. And it's interesting, right? Because this happens even in Iran, right? That environment is thought of as more suitable for a woman, right? And this also evidence that programming skill is not thought of as a male skill, right? But also what happens is that the proportion of programmers, of women in the industry drops off steeply after marriage and childbirth. Right? Because again, women have to take care of the home, the kids and everything. And then when they want to come back, it gets difficult for them because they've been out of the loop for 3 years, 5 years, whatever length of time it takes to send the kid to school. Right? So it's a complex issue. One shouldn't simplify it, or, but it is definitely present. Right?
Yeah. And it also applies to trading floors and other sectors. It's not unique to the Valley. I should add that, Absolutely. I do have more questions, but we have 7 or 8 more minutes. So let's see if there are. Yes, first,
Hi.
So I love Sacred Games. Everyone does. That's not anything new. But I bought the book. I'm really excited to read it. For me, what really was so interesting was that the main character is a Sardar, right? And this is so rare. And when we see Sardars in Bollywood or anywhere, it's very caricature representation. So, as someone, I've just started creative writing myself, and I feel the burden that a lot of minority writers feel. How do you represent your own culture outside of stereotypes? Right? And we shouldn't have to feel that burden. White people don't feel that burden. But it often plagues us. So I'm, working out how do I represent my family, culture, somewhere outside of stereotypes, right? And so there may be those things present, but then how do you navigate that? And I'm just wondering, and I'm so happy to be able to ask you this question prior to reading, why a Sardar? Why did you choose this?
So, again, I didn't plan that at all, right? Like I said, Gaitonde, I had no idea. He just showed up, right? So when I started thinking about my cop story, there was Sardar, right? And all I could see of him was, I knew two things about him. One, that he was a Sardar. The other two was that he was handsome and he was a big clothes horse. He's a dandy. He knows he's handsome, right? And, after the fact, now when I look back, maybe one of the reasons was that I was in, I think, 6th or 7th grade at my school. I was at boarding school, so the parents used to come visit, occasionally. And a friend of mine, who was a Sardar, his dad came, and he was the most impossibly elegant man that I think I've ever seen, right? Because he was wearing a suit, a really well-cut suit, but what particularly made an impression on me was that under his pug, the patka, that matched the little hanky insert that matched his socks. Like, yay, right? And he was very handsome, right? So that I thought of. And the other thing was like the name. There was our grade had a guy, a Sardar, his older brother was Sartaj, right? And then again, after the fact, once I started writing, I realized that one of the things that he would, as a minority in the Bombay police force, that was useful to me, right? Because he's on the outside a lot of the local politics, right? The Maratha and, Parulkar, the Brahmin Maratha thing, and the Dalits, and so forth in the force. So that was very useful. And as to stereotypes, I think what saves us from that, or what allows us to write more complicated characters, is just to get to know the characters really well and try and get as much of that inner universe on the page as you can, right? Because we are all complicated people, right? But the writer's job is to not just make that outline of the handsome Sardar in the spiffy, he gets his police uniforms tailored. In the book, it's a lot more is made of that, right? And Parulkar actually gives him at some point in the book a pair of Italian shoes, because he knows Sartaj loves good clothes, right? So I think that delight in those little details, if you can give them to your readers, then you've done your job. Yeah.
Okay, I'm told we have time for
That
one.
gentleman
Your hand was up first. If we have time, I'll come to you, and if we have time, I'll come. But I'm not sure of that. And please keep it brief. Yeah.
Really quick. First of all, thank you, Salil. Thank you, Vikram, for a wonderful, wonderful dialogue. Vikram, what a marvelous book, Geek Sublime, with this even more marvelous subtitle, The Beauty of Code, the Code of Beauty. Quick self-disclosure, I was born in Bombay to parents who, when they're speaking in Hindi, Gujarati or Marathi would say, "Chalo, Mumbai chalo." Several times today, you both have said Bombay. Quick quote. So, rasa arises from the fluctuations of feeling produced by manifestation. And I paraphrase what you and Jayshree were talking about, rasa, the feeling in your mouth.
Yeah.
So when the two of you say Bombay, what feeling is in your mouth? And if you say Mumbai, what feeling is in your mouth?
So, one thing is just the linguistic context, right? So when I first moved to Bombay, and all of us, everybody, don't mean I'm from a well-off family, not just me, everybody else, right? If we were speaking in Hindi, you would say Bombay chaloge, right? And if you were speaking in a different context, you might call it Mumbai. And if I'm in Sobo, right, I might say, hey, let's go leave Bombay and go somewhere else, right? So that multiplicity of language is reflected in what we call a place, right? And each of those evokes a different feeling, as you said, right? And so, I mean, the other thing about language in the book, in Sacred Games, was that if I'm sitting in a bar in Bombay telling one of those gangster stories to my friend, I will naturally slip between English and Hindi, and the local slang. So I wanted to catch that language on paper, right? So I didn't want to start translating too much, and if you I was telling yesterday, we had another opening thing, and recently I've been listening. I made a Spotify playlist of songs from the 50s to the 70s. There's this beautiful song, amazing song called Tum Jo Mil Gaye Ho, right? From Haste Zakum, and Kafi Azmi wrote the lyrics, and it's Madan Mohan's music, and it's Mohammad Rafi at the top of his game, right? So if I put that in a book, how do I translate what all those three names mean to me, right? What memories, what smells does that evoke? I think it's kind of impossible, right? And you were talking about white people don't feel the obligation to translate, right? When I was growing up in India, I started reading, I was very fascinated by America, and if an American writer is writing, they'll say, then John went to the 7-Eleven. And I was like, what the hell is a 7-Eleven? What is a store with a number, right? Because down the street from me was the local shop, right? Raju's Kirana or something, right? I knew that, but I didn't know this. Okay, I think we're being shushed.
I will say in terms of translation, everybody please read Valeri's latest work
Yes.
on translation.
Yeah.
Because everything you talked about
Yeah.
is somewhere
Yeah.
in her framework.
So the only thing I will add, I would have said exactly the same thing. The only thing I would add is that Bombay is such a lucky city that it's Mumbai, Bombaim, Bombay, and Bombay. And heptanesia, if you want to call it that way.
Yes.
So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you.